Welcome to Crime Most French, a fortnightly podcast covering intriguing cases carried out on French soil. Researched and narrated by Cedric and rudely interrupted by me, Melanie. We're the true crime podcast All the Alliance. Crack open le vin and let the mayhem commence.
This is episode 54, the case of the Sleepwalking killer. In 1887, solving a beach murder leads to the discovery of an unlikely killer who tells an incredible story.
This sounds like it's going to be something from Scooby-Doo.
I'm not even sure Scooby-Doo would have gone that far.
Okay.
Robert Ledru was an amazing detective / human being.
So it's not...
It's not
did he work
99.
at Brooklyn Nine-Nine?
99! No. He was only 35 years old, and he was the go-to man for the Paris police when it came to solving difficult cases.
Right.
He worked on everything, from burglaries to political activists that were planning to overthrow the government via black magic cults and anarchists.
Okay, so he was a real high flyer then.
Yes. Ledru knew it, and he was very proud of it. His goal in life was to be the best detective ever, and he worked very hard for it.
Right.
He often worked 20 hours a day when he was working on a case, and he just wouldn't stop until he solved it.
Do you know, he sounds like somebody I quite know who works doggedly on something and doesn't stop and has been at the laptop all weekend working.
Yes. Unfortunately, it had an impact on his health, of course, because the lack of sleep isn't good for you.
No.
But he didn't care. It was for the greater good, justice's and his.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a fine line between, you know, being fastidious and a good hard worker and just being obsessed.
Yeah, I have been deprived of sleep once for 50 hours, and I remember that at the end I was struggling to distinguish reality from what I was imagining. So it can't have been good for him and can't have been good for solving crime either. So some people at the time were wondering, how can he not sleep and still solve crime?
Mm.
Because he must have been off his head most of the time. But anyway, that worked for him, and he was apparently, I've never heard of him before, but he was very famous and very successful at solving all kinds of crimes.
Mm-hmm.
In 1887, due to his track record, the authorities in Le Havre, so it's a port in Normandy, asked Ledru to assist them on a case of missing sailors. There had been sailors that have been missing one by one for a little while, and the police had been working on the case without going anywhere. So they were desperate, so they reached out to him and said, do you want to come and give us a hand?
You can tell this is going to be a very strange case for us because we generally don't start talking about the police until kind of like the crime. This feels very strange.
Yeah, that's true. The reason why the police reached out is because they couldn't solve it, but that normally doesn't bother the police. It's because the locals were getting really antsy. Because they could see there's more and more sailors disappearing over time, and they were wondering, are we next? So they were putting pressure on the police, so they had to do something about it. Because otherwise, early 20th century police, or even late 19th century police, unsolved crime is not really a problem.
No.
So Ledru being Ledru, he accepted straight away, and he arrived in Le Havre straight from another case in Paris, and he was totally exhausted. According to witnesses, he could barely stand, and he was half asleep constantly. So they were talking to him, and he was falling asleep. So the local commissioner ordered him to go sleep for a couple of days before resuming his duties.
Yeah.
Ledru refused because there was a case to solve, and that couldn't wait because the more they waited, the more the evidence would disappear. But eventually, he was told that he's not going to work on the case if he doesn't go to sleep. So he accepted to go to bed on that day, the day he arrived, and start on the next day. So one night's sleep.
Okay. One night's sleep doesn't feel like it would be very, a bit of a drop in the ocean if he's that fatigued and tired. It sounds like he needs kind of like a long holiday.
You recuperate from lack of sleep very quickly. You don't feel completely up to speed, but a night of sleep, even after you haven't slept for a long time, is enough to get going again.
Well, I did one of my highest exam results when I was in university. I hadn't slept for 27 hours because I was so worried about this exam. And I was just so laser focused. Had to slap myself a couple of times before we actually physically went in. But yeah, I think there's a fine line between being, just completely exhausted and then, as you say, hallucinating and doing, imagining you're talking to a wolf kind of thing.
Yes. When he arrived at the police station to report for duty the next morning, he was told that this case had been downgraded because a body had been found on the beach.
All right.
And it was totally freaking the locals. So that was now the highest priority. Sailors can wait.
Yeah. That's quite open and quite exposed to kill someone on a beach.
Yeah. So Ledru said, okay, and he was sent to the beach to have a look. The dead man on the beach was André Monet. He was a prominent dressmaker at the time in Paris.
Right.
Apparently. He had come to Le Havre for health reason, the irony.
To get some fresh air.
Well, yeah, he came for health reason and died. So anyway, he had been found that morning face down in the sand with a bullet in the chest. There was no apparent motive because he wasn't a local, so he barely knew anybody locally.
No.
There was no witness. There was no evidence. He still had money in his wallet, so it wasn't robbery. There was just no reason why he was dead with a bullet in the chest.
Yeah, I mean, we always know these random spree-type killers when they just go out on a whim. Those are the most difficult cases to solve.
Yeah, because there's nothing tying them to the victim. So how do you go from one to the other unless they left evidence?
Exactly.
Which on the beach is not going to be easy to find.
No, definitely not.
It makes it very, very difficult to solve. So they were happy to have Ledru at hand.
Yes, have an expert on hand, definitely.
When Ledru arrived, he had a quick look around the body and quickly focused on a set of steps in the sand coming from the body. Coming to the body and then moving away.
I wonder if I guess it would be a bit early to expect them to do plaster casts of...
Well, they did.
Okay.
He looked at the steps for a while.
Okay.
And he was repeatedly saying to himself, "These look familiar. These look familiar. I know these feet. These look familiar."
So somebody followed him then, maybe, or is it?
But what's weird is that he seemed to know what the feet were.
Well, I mean, he works from Paris. I just wonder if somebody who he'd crossed might have followed him from Paris.
It could be, but it kind of freaked out the other cops because he was just standing there looking at them and talking to himself. I know these steps.
Yeah, slightly weird. So obviously, was it a distinctive gait or something? Or
he lost interest in everything else, which annoyed his superiors because he just wasn't interested in talking to witnesses, acquaintances, to passers-by, to anybody. He just wasn't doing that. He was only interested in those feet marks. So the locals thought, that's not how cops work. But he just stood there and stared at the steps, and that was it. So he ordered casts to be made. So they were making casts at the time. And then once he got them, he took them, went to the other end of the beach, sat on the sand, and stared at them for a few hours.
Right.
He was just sitting there, and he wasn't paying attention to the time, to the beating sun, to the rising tide, because the water was getting close to him. And all the other cops were looking at him, wondering, what is he doing? He's just doing nothing. He's just looking at that plaster.
Okay, that's strange.
And just staring.
He needs to go back to his bed. You're still tired. Go back to bed.
Well, yeah. After a few hours, at the end of the day, he got up and he said, "I've solved the case. No need for more investigation," and walked away and went back to his hotel.
Right.
So nobody, it freaked out the cops because they said, what?
Okay.
Why did he solve a case by just sitting on his ass in the sand, just looking at the cast of some steps in the sand, and why did he go away without telling us anything? So,
I mean, presumably if there had been something so distinctive about these footprints, everyone else would have known about it. So, Carry on.
Apparently not.
We're all waiting here with bated breath because
Yes.
there's obviously some piece of information we're missing.
So the next morning, he went back to the police station
Right.
and he reported to his boss.
Uh-huh.
And the commissioner informed him that a bullet casing had been found near the body.
Ah, okay, good.
And they were pretty sure it was the bullet casing of the bullet that was in the dead guy.
Right. So we're talking anything that can be used for ballistics then?
No, there wasn't really...
No,
well, there wasn't anything that good at the time.
Nothing as sophisticated.
No, nothing like that. So he got excited and he said, good, that's probably the final piece of evidence that would close the case.
This is really beginning to feel like an Agatha Christie.
Yes, he took it and went back to his hotel. Still, no explanation. So again, people are completely confused about what he's doing. So now he's gone to his hotel with the casts of the feet mark on the beach, with the bullet casing, and he still hasn't said anything except that he solved the case. He came back a few hours later, and he said to his boss, there's no need for me to stay here any longer. The case is solved. I know who the killer is. And, okay, everybody was a bit surprised, but they wanted to know.
And could we have the missing piece of information?
Yeah. So what he did was take the train back to Paris.
Right. I didn't expect that. Okay.
So he still didn't tell anything to anyone in Le Havre, and he just left. And he reported to the police station where he used to work in Paris, asking to talk to the commissioner.
Okay. Just lots of questions and lots of confused faces all round. And what about all the poor sailors that have been murdered in Le Havre? Have they got to just carry on being murdered, have they?
Apparently, yes.
Ugh.
Because he was gone at that point, so he wasn't going to solve that case.
Sloppy work.
Yeah. So he told the commissioner in Paris that what he thought the story was. The murderer woke up in the middle of the night. He put his socks and shoes and clothes on. Then he made his way to the beach, and there he met Monet, the dead guy, who was also having a night walk on the beach. Apparently it's a thing you do in Le Havre, and I can't remember what season it was, but it wasn't the height of summer.
I'll tell you, I don't think there would be any good season to go walking at night in Le Havre.
If it's very warm, why not? But
it's frozen north. It sticks out too far into the sea. No, forget that.
Apparently the murderer started a conversation with Monet.
Right.
He's not too sure what about. Then the conversation turned into an argument. Maybe the murderer was asking too many questions. Maybe Monet intentionally annoyed the murderer. Who knows? One thing he knows for sure, the murderer drew his gun, shot Monet in the chest, and left him to die.
Well, yeah, you can't say that they had an argument. I mean, there's only one way that he could possibly.
Yes. Then the murderer went back to his hotel, climbed through the window, returned the gun to its hiding place, and went back to sleep. And he knew all that because the murderer was himself.
Huh?
To prove what he was saying, he explained that when he got to the beach, the footprints looked very familiar to him.
All right.
It took him a good while to place them. Once he had the plaster casts and looked at them closely, it hit him. One of the feet was clearly his. He was certain because he had had an accident as a kid and he had lost a big toe. And the footprints were missing a big toe. Ooh. The same big toe.
Right, yeah, you wouldn't be able to make the same kind of like tread, would you?
But yeah, the mark of your feet would be a bit strange because it would miss a big chunk.
Yes.
So that's how he knew it was his feet.
What?
He also remembered that morning when he woke up, he discovered that he was wearing socks and they were wet. And he couldn't understand why, but...
Did they smell salty like they'd been in the sea?
Probably did. So he couldn't explain it at the time and he said, okay, well, I'll deal with that later. I need to go and solve that sailor's case. So he ignored it for a while.
Right.
And then the shell casings the casing that was found, when he took it to his hotel, where he had left his gun, because he didn't like to wear a gun. The only cases he wore a gun when he was working was when he knew he would have to interact with bad guys.
Right.
Because apparently there was an incident, and I couldn't find out what that was. And he had a phobia of killing an innocent person.
Right, okay.
So he just wouldn't take his gun. So his gun was hidden in his hotel bedroom under some sheets. So he went to his hotel, took his gun out. It was missing one bullet.
Right.
And it was the same brand, same model as the bullet casing that had been found next to the dead guy.
So he got up in the middle of the night, went out for a walk and shot someone, and then went back home again.
Yes. And the gun was a German gun that wasn't very common. So
Right.
he knew it had to be his. That still doesn't explain what happened. But
No,
that's how he knew it was him. And then he gave the commissioner his socks, which he had carefully packaged to be sure that they were protected.
Right.
And he said that he could inspect them, and they would discover that there is sand on those socks, which matches the sand of the beach in Le Havre.
Okay.
So it had to be him. He was the murderer.
I'm just all the confusion. I feel like you've kind of like skipped 5 pages and we just don't know.
But no, I didn't.
That's just weird.
Like you, he didn't remember shooting the guy. He couldn't explain it.
Right.
The only explanation he could come up with is he had been asleep and in a trance somehow.
Right. He'd been in some kind of fugue state.
Possibly. He didn't know because he wasn't conscious at the time.
Right.
And he killed Monet without being conscious of it. That's the only way he could explain it. But in any case, he said, I can't be let out and free in the community. You have to arrest me. I have to be put in jail because otherwise I'm going to kill other people and I still won't know why and how.
So, presumably they just thought he'd kind of like been wandering around in his sleep. So he'd been sleepwalking.
But that's what he's thinking, yes.
Uh-huh.
So the commissioner couldn't believe that story.
No, I can't believe that story.
Yeah, exactly. How do you kill someone in your sleep?
No.
So they refused to arrest him. And they sent him home under the instruction of catching up on his sleep for a start, because, again, he wasn't sleeping enough. And they decided to supervise him with trustworthy cops and doctors the whole time he was asleep in his house, just to know what's going on. So to test him, they put a gun on his night table. It was loaded with blanks, obviously, which is still crazy because blanks can still kill you, but they put blanks in it. And they waited.
Yeah.
The first 3 nights they monitored him. Nothing happened, except like a baby. The 4th night, he appeared to wake up, put his work clothes on, took the gun, and started to walk towards the door. The doctor that was monitoring him in the room, so the doctors were monitoring, sitting on like a chair next to the bed, waiting all night, stood up and put himself between Ledru and the door.
Mm-hmm.
Ledru seemed to be surprised and jumped, took his gun out, aimed at the doctor's head, and shot.
I hope there weren't any bullets in the gun.
No, they put blanks in it, but a blank very close can still kill you.
Yeah.
Apparently the doctor wasn't armed, and that's it. He put the gun back in his holster or whatever he was, went back to bed, and slept until the next morning. And didn't remember any of that. Apparently, that convinced the police that Ledru's story was right. He was sleepwalking, and he could go and kill people in his sleep without remembering. That's very, very thin evidence, because he could have staged it if he wanted to be sure that he was found innocent, I guess.
Yeah.
But that convinced the police, that convinced the justice system. He was never arrested.
That's crazy.
Yes. He didn't work anymore.
No.
So for the rest of his life, he lived on a farm near Paris as a recluse.
Right.
Not seeing anybody.
Okay.
Not leaving his farm. He was given indefinite health leave from the police. So probably on the pension, something like that.
Yeah.
And regularly cops would pass by and check on him to make sure that he was still there.
Still alive.
He was still alive and hadn't killed more people.
Killing anyone.
Yeah. He died 50 years after the murder in 1937. There has been a few cases of sleepwalking murders in history, more recently. It's called somnambulistic homicide.
So it is a thing?
Apparently it is a thing, at least in the justice system. I don't know how medical it is, but the justice system in the US at least recognizes that thing as something that people can have.
I mean, you would have to see somebody's brainwave patterns when they were...
It's crazy because normally when you sleepwalk, and I've known someone who was kind of sleepwalking, you do things that are extremely repetitive that you're used to do.
Yeah.
So if you have a job that is very repetitive, you might do it in your sleep.
Yeah, you've got muscle memory, yeah.
Yes, you don't go out, take a gun, find someone, talk to that person, shoot them, go back to sleep.
No.
That's not repetitive. That's not something you can do in your sleep.
But it's so random, you know, and he was such a high flyer. Why would you...
There's been a few cases in courts in the US in the 20th century where people have killed members of their family, usually, and blamed sleepwalking. And they got away with it.
Well, that
has happened.
The young guy that murdered his family, that in the Amity house, that set off the whole thing. He claimed he didn't remember anything to begin with, but of course he did, and he went to prison. And
but there has been a few cases where people have been. I don't know if they've been found innocent or exonerated or found having lesser circumstances or whatever, but that has happened. If you find a gullible jury, I guess, you might be able to convince them that you were sleepwalking when you went to kill your ex-wife because she wanted a pension or something like that. Apparently that has been done. So that's the end of the story. That's the sleepwalking murderer cop.
Yeah.
It has happened.
It has happened, and I think what it's taught us that night walking, sometimes a dangerous pursuit.